Yo, what is going on, Headliner Nation family? Hopefully everybody is getting those lineups and rosters set for playoff week. Should be round one for the majority of you this week. I know some of you started last week, and who knows, maybe there's a few of you starting next week, but whether or not that matters, playoffs are here. Playoffs are here, and it is time to bring home those championships. Headliner Nation, I've got all the week 15 start and sit analysis for the tight end position for you right now. I think it's time that we go ahead and jump on into it. Let's talk about the first matchup of the week, San Francisco and Seattle. Seattle is allowing the second most fantasy points to tight ends right now. I mean, they're not doing too well against the tight end position. And this sets up really well for George Kittle, especially considering the fact that we've lost Deebo Samuel for the next few weeks. More targets for George Kittle. I know the last couple of weeks have not been great for Kittle, and owners are, a little bit worried about it, which they should be. But now that we've got no Deebo Samuel, and this is a tougher matchup in the secondary for Seattle does a really good job. Now that we've got all that coming together, George Kittle, hopefully, fingers crossed, can get back on track this week. The San Francisco allows the fourth fewest fantasy points to tight end. So on the opposite end of the spectrum there, when you've got Noah Fant and you got Will Dissly, we're going to skip on both of them because they're just unreliable, they're unsteady, and it's a tough matchup. Indianapolis, Minnesota, not a whole lot to see here on the Indianapolis side of things. They continue to use a rotation of tight ends, giving them different looks, giving them more snaps, one or the other. There just isn't any consistency within the position there in Indianapolis right now. So no tight ends from Indy really piquing my interest this week. But TJ Hawkinson, I was expecting a little bit more from him last week against Detroit. Now, was it a good game? Yeah. Could it have been a lot better? Of course. But with TJ Hawkinson, Indianapolis allows the fewest fantasy points to wide receivers. Hawk could really be the number two behind Justin Jefferson this week, especially if Adam Thielen struggles for any reason. Give me some TJ Hawkinson to, at least get us 10 points this week. Baltimore and Cleveland is going to bring my Manscaped must-watch matchup of the week. Head on over to manscaped.com. Use code word headliners when you check out. You're going to get 20% off your entire order and free shipping. This is a great matchup. Now, we've got a tight end in Mark Andrews that is going up against Cleveland that has allowed the seventh fewest fantasy points to tight ends. A little bit of a tougher matchup, and he's had back-to-back poor performances. But if you own Mark Andrews, are you really sitting him this time of the season? Probably not. Even with a third-string quarterback, potentially, I'm still running Mark Andrews out there because he's the only reliable target on that offense right now. David Njoku, on the other hand, back-to-back weeks with touchdowns, looks good with Deshaun Watson. Feels like there might be a little of a connection there, and we'll see if that continues to develop over the coming weeks. But David Njoku going up against Baltimore, absolutely, I think we got to lock him in as a start. Miami and Buffalo Buffalo already allows the fifth fewest fantasy points to opposing tight ends. And would I trust Mike Gesicki even in the best matchups? Probably not. I'm sure as heck not trusting him in the worst matchups. Dawson Knox, Miami allows the fourth most fantasy points to opposing tight end. I'm going to roll with Dawson Knox this week. I don't hate it. Diggs has been really the only consistent playmaker in that offense over the last few weeks. And Knox, coming off a couple decent performances here and there, a couple touchdowns. This week against Miami, I think he finds the end zone, and I think he's a guy that we actually might be able to trust a little bit. Atlanta and New Orleans, and I actually took a look at Michael Pruitt a little bit, and I thought to myself, do we want to run him out there? Desmond Ridder, second stringer, going to be starting this week, probably going to not have as large of a playbook as what we've seen so far this season. Not that Atlanta's playbook has many passing plays in it either at this point, but with touchdowns in back-to-back games, I thought, is Ridder going to look his way? And then I checked into it a little bit more. New Orleans allows the third fewest fantasy points to tight ends. Even though he has touchdowns in back-to-back games, he only has 4 total targets in those games, and he hasn't even broken double-digit receiving yards. For me personally, I'm going to still sit Michael Pruitt, and we'll see maybe in the coming weeks if he can keep scoring touchdowns, if we might be able to rely on him, but it's far too risky right now. For Juwan Johnson, though, I know Week 12 sucked. The last time that we saw him really out on the field, getting ready to go, it just wasn't good. 2 targets, no receptions. However, in the games before that, he had touchdowns in 3 straight games, and he had touchdowns in 5 games. That's pretty good. 5 touchdowns in 4 or 5 games, 3 straight TDs. He might be a little touchdown dependent, but really at the position right now, who isn't, and who's seen more red zone targets than Juwan Johnson? Pittsburgh and Carolina, and Pat Freiermuth is going to get a tougher matchup this week, and that might try to deter you from maybe starting him, but we are going to continue to roll with him. Scored last week. The targets continue to be there. Even if Mitchie Biscuits ends up being the quarterback this week, I'm still going to run with Patty F. Tommy Tremble and Ian Thomas, though. Sam Darnold targeted like 900 different receivers last week, and Tommy Tremble and Ian Thomas were nowhere close to the top of the pecking order. I'm not interested in either of them. Philadelphia and Chicago, and this would be a great matchup if Dallas Goedert were healthy, but Jack Stoll just hasn't done anything. He's been irrelevant since the injury to Dallas Goedert. He's not doing anything at all, so you shouldn't even own him at this point. Cole Kmet, though, has been doing a few things, right? I mean, he's looked really good. He's the #1 target of Justin Fields. They have tons of injuries at the wide receiver position right now, and they're probably going to be trailing as well. Now, Philadelphia may allow the 8th most fantasy points to opposing tight ends, but I have to assume this week that Cole Kmet is going to see a ton of targets. Kansas City and Houston, and Travis Kelce, he hasn't passed 80 receiving yards in the last 3 weeks. A little bit of a down performance based on the standards that he had set earlier in the year. It doesn't matter. We're still running him out there. You could throw Travis Kelce in your lineup and get 5 points, and guess what? You wouldn't even be here without him. So give him the respect he deserves and run him out there. Don't get cute with it. Not that any of you would be anyway. For Jordan Akins, though, Jordan Akins and Brevin Jordan are both seeing kind of a split right now in targets, receptions. I mean, really everything. Akins has a little bit more production than him, but it's not nearly enough for me to even consider starting him in my lineup. Dallas and Jacksonville allows the 7th most fantasy points to opposing tight ends. And even though Dalton Schultz really hasn't had a ton of upside, he's been pretty safe. He is a guy that we can throw out there, and realistically, 8 fantasy points is always within his reach. Yeah, 8 doesn't sound like much. At the tight end position right now, it's actually quite a bit. But on the flip side, I need to warn everybody right now, Evan Ingram could be a trap. The dude is coming off a performance with 160 yards, 2 touchdowns. He looks like the guy. A lot of you are probably going to be running to shove him into your lineup this week. The Dallas Cowboys allow the fewest fantasy points to tight ends. And yes, they didn't look great against Houston this week, for whatever reason, but it doesn't matter. They could come back alive easy in this game against Jacksonville. Evan Ingram is still going to be a start for me. He is a risky start this week, however, and keep in mind that his upside could be very well limited in this matchup. Detroit and the New York Jets, and the Detroit tight ends, well, they're not really doing much of anything. All the points are going to wide receivers right now, which is absolutely fine. I'm okay with it. All 3 of these guys, you see him out on the field every once in a while. Tyler Conklin, though. Detroit's bend don't break offense is bad for teams that are playing them, but still not bad enough for fantasy owners to sit them. Now, why is that? Because their defense still gives up a decent amount of yards and still gives up a decent amount of receptions. They just have gotten a lot better of creating turnovers, and they've got a lot better of holding opponents to field goals. That is why the Detroit defense has been so much better. In anywhere in between the 20s, you're seeing teams air it out a little bit and having some success. But once you get into that red zone, Detroit's defense is kind of taking those away a little bit, and they're pushing you back out of it. So for me, when I take a look at Tyler Conklin, is he a start this week? The matchup's great. But who's going to be the quarterback? We don't know. I mean, Tyler White barely finished the game last week and had to go to the hospital afterwards. Joe Flacco's the one that came in for him, but do they throw Zach Wilson back out there? I don't know. If it's Joe Flacco, I really love this matchup for Conklin. I mean, we already know that Corey Davis is banged up this week. Tyler Conklin could be a guy that Joe Flacco, who went to him a lot earlier in the season, recoups some of those targets and they go back to him this week. And not only that, but he's got 15 targets over the last 2 weeks. I think the Jets notice we got to get Tyler Conklin more involved, and I expect him to be involved this week. Arizona and Denver, and unfortunately, Kyler Murray looks to be done for the year. Initial diagnosis was an ACL tear that has not been confirmed as of this recording, but it hurts. It hurts that offense. Colt McCoy is going to be the guy moving forward. And with that being said, Trey McBride was the guy that I was like, all right, let's dive a little bit deeper into Trey McBride this week with no Kyler Murray. Is Colt McCoy going to go his way a little bit more often? He saw 6 targets in the game last week. I'm like, all right, okay, maybe we do see him. That still trailed Hopkins, still trailed Marquise Brown, still trailed James Conner. So while Trey McBride might see a couple of games here, there was some decent performance with Colt McCoy now at the helm. I don't think it's enough for us to realistically try to run him out there. I'm just not going to do it. Greg Dulcich, however, he was going to be a sit for me this week. But then he plays Arizona, that allows the most fantasy points to tight ends. Just gave up over 70 receiving yards to Hunter Henry on only 3 catches. And really, Denver would be a bunch of idiots to not get Dulcich into the game plan this week. I mean, is Russell Wilson even going to be the quarterback? I don't know. He's in the concussion protocol. It's a risky start, but it's a start nonetheless. When you have such a good performance against the team giving up the most points to tight ends, you got to get a little risky. New England and Las Vegas, and I'm actually going to leave Hunter Henry as a start this week, which is a little surprising, but they're really banged up at the wide receiver position right now in New England. So Hunter Henry should see more than enough targets this week. My hope is that we see anywhere between 6 to 8. We saw some big plays from him, so if he can get 4 receptions, he should put us right around 8 points in fantasy leagues. Foster Moreau, he's only really a start for me this week if you're desperate. I mean, he hasn't had over 45 receiving yards in a game yet this season, and he's highly touchdown dependent. And if he doesn't score a touchdown, he's only getting you 3 to 4 fantasy points. Now, given that this is an okay matchup against New England, who is really tough against wide receivers, but does give up some fantasy points to tight ends, I get why maybe we'd want to go that route. But me personally, I'd probably skip out on him this week, and I would rather go for a guy like a Hunter Henry or heck, even a Greg Dulcich, who have better matchups. Tennessee and the Los Angeles Chargers, and my boy Chigioco he can't make it to a start yet. He just doesn't have the numbers. The numbers physically will not allow me to put him as a start. But if you're out there and you want to start him, I don't blame you. I'm excited for the guy too. I think he is going to be a good tight end. I mean, next year he could even be a breakout candidate for me. It depends on if Ryan Tannehill's still the quarterback there next year and what they do to kind of revamp that offense. So for me, he's highly touchdown dependent right now. If he doesn't score you a touchdown, you're probably looking at anywhere between 4 and 6 fantasy points. Now, that's basically the entire position though right now. So am I willing to bet on Chigioco? Absolutely. The bet gets a lot safer, though, if we were to be missing Treylon Burks again. Gerald Everett is actually a lot better, it feels like, when the wide receivers are healthy. Now, at the beginning of the year, when guys like Keenan Allen were beat up and Mike Williams missed some time, it was like, hey, we're going to go with Gerald Everett just because of this. And Gerald Everett didn't really do anything, and it didn't seem right. And now that they're starting to get healthy on offense, all of a sudden it seems like he's doing a lot better now. 14 targets over the last 2 weeks, and he gets a Tennessee team that allows the 3rd most fantasy points to tight end. I mean, are there really any better options this week? I would argue that outside of the top 3 or 4, probably not. Cincinnati and Tampa Bay. And Tampa Bay does allow the 6th most fantasy points at tight ends, but we don't know about Hayden Hurst yet. Missed last week with that calf injury. Can he make it back this week? We'll keep an eye on it. Cade Otton, for me, I just can't trust him right now because there's going to be weeks where he scores, but he doesn't see a ton of volume. And then there's other weeks where he sees a decent amount of targets, but he doesn't really do anything with them and doesn't score. There's other weeks where he doesn't get a lot of targets, but he has a big play and he gets 5 points. For me, there's just so much up and downs with him, especially with his offense as a whole right now, that when you say, hey, who are you going to trust in this offense? It's Mike Evans, it's Chris Godwin, it's Rachaad White. It really is not Cade Otton, though. New York and Washington, and what is going to be a very pivotal matchup for that NFC East bout. They're going to face off this week. Now, they played each other 2 weeks ago, right before the bye. The Washington Commanders do allow the second fewest fantasy points at tight end. So Daniel Bellinger, guy that, yes, I do like, but not risking it on this week. Could see some better weeks ahead. I don't really know if he has a whole lot of upside this week. Logan Thomas. I wanted to go to Logan Thomas. I want to go with Logan Thomas so bad, but there just isn't enough information right now to back up saying, yeah, we're going to play Logan Thomas outside of just my gut instinct. And my gut right now, I don't know what it is because I had Taco Bell last night, so it could just be that. But my gut right now is saying something could be there this week. Just how risky do you want to be with it? Welcome to the Los Angeles Rams and the Green Bay Packers. My name is Kyle Richardson, and I have a problem, and that problem is Tyler Higbee. He continues to be within the top 6 tight ends and most targets per game. The opportunity is there, just nothing is happening with it. Yes, he is a sit for me, but I had to talk myself again this week into putting him in as a sit because he's getting so many targets this season, it's hard for me not to list him as a start. What happens with Baker Mayfield now, though? That's going to be the question. If he blows up on waivers this week, he blows up on waivers this week. We've got to see what happens with Baker Mayfield, though, before we can take another step with doing anything with Tyler Higbee. And for Big Bobby Tunyon, it's just not there. The connection with Aaron Rodgers just is not what it used to be. He's not worth your time. And guess what? I was worth your time because you've made it to the end of the video. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks so much for checking out this episode of the Fantasy Headliners and all my tight end research. Make sure you check back on Thursdays for those rankings and any updated information we may have for tight ends. Hopefully everybody is doing well out there. Hit that like button for me. Subscribe to the channel if you're new here. Leave me a comment down below with any questions. I'm going to get out though. Peace out. Stay safe and stay healthy, and I'll catch y'all on the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.